Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. So this is the second of what's probably going to be 3 videos, maybe 4, but probably 3, covering the Sev Cordovan Q&A from a week ago. So if you haven't seen it, I did an initial video on the producer's letter, which came out about a week ago. I did a video just a few days ago covering the whole VIP gold roll situation and my thoughts on some solutions for that. That was discussed in the Sev Cordovan Q&A. In this video, we're going to talk about what new raids are going to be coming this year, in my opinion, what raid I think is going to be revamped. And I'll do probably one more video covering just a grab bag of everything else. But before we get started, really quick, in my link tree that's linked below in the description, you can find links to the Discord if you're interested in that, to my Twitch channel where I stream 1 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. You can find the Sev Cordovan Q&A for all the context. You can find a link to that below. Also, if you all could do me a favor, just please, give me a sub on YouTube if you're not subbed to me already, just because I'm really close to 5K. A lot of you have subbed in the last few days, in the last several videos where I've asked for it, so I really appreciate that. But I'm just under 30 subs away from 5,000. So that would be a cool milestone to hit. Anyways, let's talk about the topic of this video, and I'm on the DDO wiki, as you can see, to talk about raids. So in the Sev Cordovan Q&A, at the 13-minute, 25-second mark, Cordovan confirmed that the Vecna mini expansion will include a raid. So initially, we thought that it would be, well, my initial reaction to the producer's letter, if you saw that video, was that it would be along the lines of Saltmarsh, maybe 10 quests in no raid in a wilderness area, something like that. But they actually said there's going to be a raid, so we can probably expect more like 8 quests in a raid, something like that. So that's pretty cool, but obviously one of those raids, that's going to be new. But in addition to that, just right at that 13-minute, 25-second mark in that YouTube VOD of the Sev Cordovan Q&A, they also discussed what is going to be what looks very much like a revamped old raid next year. So if you read between the lines, it's pretty obvious that's what Sev Cordovan were saying. They went back and forth about possibly revealing it, and several decided not to, but pretty obvious from that discussion that it's going to be a revamped legendary raid. So I'm on the DDO wiki, so we can go through all the raids and talk about which one it could be. And as you'll see, I think there's one very obvious choice, which is what they very likely will choose. I mean, they could, you never know. SSG can do what they want. They could always pick something because it's really easy in terms of man hours, or it's just something that the developers really like and they just really want to revamp it because they personally like it. They can, you never know. But I'll talk in this video about the things that would make the most sense and things that wouldn't, and we'll just go through them all. So when you whittle down the raids in DDO of what's left to make legendary, there really is not hardly anything left. So it's pretty obvious the choices they could pick. So let's just go through them. So first of all, the Chronoscope. Chronoscope already has an epic version. I think there is a small chance that the Chronoscope could be what they choose. Obviously, it already has a low epic version, but it's a very well liked raid. There's no flagging. It wouldn't be one that you wouldn't think would be too difficult for them to scale to endgame if they wanted to. They could potentially take the epic version and make it a legendary version, but I think the odds are pretty darn low of that, just because they've already revamped all that loot this past year. You can already there's already a legendary version of the 5-piece Chronoscope set, so that's work's already done. I just don't think that there's enough there to offer. Could it be Chronoscope? Maybe. I think players really like this raid, but I doubt it. Tempest Spine already has a legendary version, so now we get to Vaughn 5 and 6, so Plane of Night here. Could they pick 5 and 6? I think also there's a very low chance, kind of like Chronoscope, the same deal here. They already revamped all this gear in the past year. There's already legendary versions of all this stuff. Also, other reason I don't think it's going to be Vaughn is because not only does it have an epic version already, obviously, but it's the big appeal of that raid is the Sword of Shadow, and the developers have already discussed the possibility of a legendary Sword of Shadow, and they're not going to do it. When they did the Shard Seal Scroll revamp, they specifically did not make a legend. There is no legendary Sword of Shadow. They did not make one because the whole thing with the legendary Sword of Shadow that makes it special is its amazing crit profile, and they can't make a legendary version of that without basically making every other two-handed weapon in the game not interesting, because it would be by far the best. So there's not going to be the most appealing thing about the raid is not there. The gear already has legendary versions. I mean, could they, with Chrono and Vaughn, make a legendary version and then just make fully crafted legendary versions of that gear dropping in the raid? I guess they could, but it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. as other possibilities, and also the fact that it already has an epic version just makes it less appealing. Even though you can't play it at cap at any difficulty level, it's challenging just because of the 6th level Reaper lockout. So if you're above, it's a level 22 raid. If you're above 28, you can't enter in Reaper. So that's another problem. So could it be Vaughn? It could be, but I'm going to say with this and Chronoscope, I think it's very small chance, I would say, of it being Legendary Chrono or Vaughn. Let's continue on. So here's one which there's a chance, but I certainly don't think it makes sense compared to one of the other far better options is Titan. So Titan is one of those raids very rarely run. I would say Titan, it's got to be the least popular content in the entire game. Has got to be the Titan raid because the flagging is really cryptic. They've talked a lot about, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but they have talked a bit. I believe it was Tolero sometime last year in one of the interviews talked a little bit about how they're trying to get about flagging and how it's not really a straightforward process for them to go back and just remove flagging. So this raid is infamous for how difficult it is to flag for. And would they bother with all the work to go back and mess with all the flagging, remove all that? Not to mention there's a pre-raid as well. There's a lot of work there, and it's a raid that I just don't think many players like. I mean, certainly there's some players that love it, but for the most part, people don't like this raid. I just can't see the community really wanting this over another raid. So do I think it could happen? It certainly could. Maybe the devs just really feel like they want to run this. There's also the compelling argument that because this raid is so rarely run, that it might be worth making it legendary just because it would be virtually a new raid to so many players because no one ever runs it. So could it happen? It could, but there's just one raid. I think that's a much better choice. So let's continue on here. Zwabi's Revenge. So in other words, Demon Queen, just like Chrono, just like the Volta Knight raid. There's already legendary versions of this gear that was made in the Shard Seal Scroll revamp. So obviously this already has an epic version. Granted, no way to play it at a challenge at in game. I mean, the only way if you're at level cap to play this raid is just with a casual breeze. I mean, on Epic Elite, so there's no way to get a challenge from it. But like I said before, the loot's already been legendarified. But there is one compelling thing I think the developers wanted to. This has to be by far the lowest amount of work from any raid they could make legendary, because there's 2 rooms. There's only like a handful of mobs they would have to scale up. I can't imagine that this would take very long. If this happens, it would be just because it would be very, very easy, a very low number of ban hours. So I'm going to say like a little bit higher than these other ones because of that. Okay, next is Reaver's Fate. I don't think they would pick Reaver's Fate for the same reason I don't think they would pick Abbott, because this raid already has a sequel to it. Obviously, it's very... Fall of Truth is a very different raid from Reaver's Fate, obviously, but it already has a sequel to it in that storyline. So I just don't see them doing it for that reason. Ascension Chamber, so Abbott, Heroic Abbott, again, Mark of Death exists, which is not... It obviously isn't the same raid, but it's somewhat similar. And you can already play that at in-game if you want. So I don't think it's going to be Ascension Chamber. Plus, players don't really like this raid anyways because of the goggles and the disappearing tiles mechanic. So I don't think it's going to happen. I think very small chance. So the Shroud next, not going to be the Shroud. Obviously, Legendary Shroud exists. Vision and Destruction, Town of Zoriat, Master Artificer, these already have legendary versions. Okay, that brings us to Tower of Despair. So Tower of Despair is the raid I think by far has the best chance. It makes by far the most sense, in my opinion, of any raid they could pick. It's a raid that does not have an epic version. It's a raid that was very nostalgic for a lot of players. It was a big part of the level 20 in game. It's a raid that wouldn't be very difficult for them, I wouldn't think, to make legendary, just because it's not a very complicated raid. It's really not a very long raid either. It's also, the only thing with Tower of Despair is how are they going to deal with the Boots of Anchoring mechanic. So for those y'all don't know, the boss in this raid casts a he cast Banishment, which back in the day you had to have these things called the Boots of Anchoring that you would craft from ingredients you got from the Amrath quest to make you immune to that in the infight. If you didn't have those on and he cast Banishment on you, you'd get booted out of the raid and you get banished back from Amrath to Eberron. So that was a thing back in the day. How are they going to deal with that mechanic? A lot of ways they could deal with that. They could either perhaps in the mini expansion they could put another item, make another item available that make you immune to banishment. I don't think they would have they're obviously not going to, I cannot imagine they would make legendary versions of the quest. Plus that was not announced in the producer's letter any kind of plans to revamp the whole pack. Though what they listed in the timeline there for 2023 was just the raid. So I can't imagine that they were going to revamp the pack so it can drop ingredients for the Boots of Anchoring. So I don't see that happening. So what I see them doing here is either one, just removing it from the Horoth, the boss there at the end, just make it so we can't cast banishment, or add another banishment item in the game sometime during 2023 that players could farm to get it. Now there is the ban hammer from the anniversary event, but that's a limited time item. The only other items, as far as I'm aware, that has banishment immunity on it are the Boots of Anchoring and the Banhammer from the anniversary event. So I think they could add something in to perhaps the anniversary, not the anniversary, something perhaps to the mini expansion, Vecna mini expansion this year that would have anchoring on it. I could see that happening. Although that would feel a little bad for players, because you're waiting to buy what are you supposed to do if you're just waiting to buy the mini expansion for points? You're not going to be able to have access to an item unless you go back and farm the heroic quest for the Boots of Anchoring. So I don't know. There's a lot of ways they could go with that. It's kind of a minor issue. They could just skirt around it by just removing it from the boss if they wanted to. Now there is the flagging with the Amaranth quest, but I don't know how much work that would be. But considering the raid isn't really that long and players really like it, it seems like the obvious choice here. There's also the loot. I think there's some really amazing possibilities with the loot. So for those of y'all who don't know, Tower of Despair back in the day, it would drop rings, and each ring that dropped in the raid was essentially tied to the heroic enhancements at the time. So like, for example, there's a ring that's for Barbarian example, there's a ring specifically for Occult Slayer, there's one specifically for Friendly Berserker. So like Cleric, there's a War Priest ring, there's a Radiant Servant ring, there's a Shintao ring for Monk, etc., etc. There's a Pale Master ring for Wizard. So the rings are themed around the heroic enhancements, or at least what they were back in the day. So they could do something really interesting here with the loot. They could add ring belt sets in the legendary version list that instead of corresponding to heroic enhancements, they would correspond to the epic destinies. That seems very obvious to me that they would create the loot that way. So I think that's a very, very interesting way of them to design loot, have it kind of tie into the epic destinies and enhance those abilities in some way. Maybe have a set bonus that's tied directly to those treats could be really interesting. So you could have a ring belt set specifically for Exalted Angel, ring belt set specifically for Sentinel. There's just a ring belt set for every epic destiny. That would mean they would have to go back and update the raid if they add new epic destinies, or I guess they technically wouldn't have to, but they probably should, and add more loot into the raid years down the line whenever they do add new epic destinies. But yeah, it's really, really cool idea. Now, I will say with Tower of Despair, the belts that tied into the ring belt set, so the rings dropped in the raid and the belts dropped in the quest, they could just make all the belts and rings all just drop in the raid. So maybe have two chests, one that drops belts, one that drops rings. There's a lot of possibilities. So I think they could get around the problem of the belts coming from the quest, but they could just put them all in the raid. That's a possibility, because I really can't see them making the Amaranth quest legendary. In the producer's letter, they did not mention any new packing legendary-ified. They mentioned a raid getting legendary treatment. So yeah, so that's why I think it's going to be Tower of Despair. That's by far the best chance, I think, for this year. We'll see legendary Tower of Despair. That's my prediction. Then again, if you saw my if you saw my video from this past year where I was predicting which quest pack would be made legendary in 2022, I was terribly wrong, because they picked the Temple of Elemental Evil, which I will say I will give myself a little bit of a pass for that, just because they did change their methodology to where they took a pack that had an epic version already and made it legendary. They'd never done that before. They'd always taken something that was heroic only and add an extra version of it. They've never before have taken away an epic version and added a legendary version. So I will give myself a little bit of a pass for that. But anyways, let's continue on here. Is there anything else worth discussing? So we went Tower of Despair, Lord of Blades. already has a legendary version. Caught in the Web is a little interesting because it's a level 24 raid. So this means with Caught in the Web, one of the casualties of the Caught in the Web was one of the casualties of the level 32 cap increase, because as you all know, the lockout for Reaper is 6 levels, so you can no longer play Caught in the Web at a challenge level, in game. Before, when 30 was in game, you could still play Caught in the Web at R10 if you wanted to and get a really big challenge, but you can't anymore. You can only run an epic lead in game. So there is a way they could scale it up. It would be, I guess, somewhat interesting that you could play that at in-game again, but again, Caught in the Web is a raid that players don't like very much for a lot of reasons. The Lolth fight was not as interesting as it could have been. The spell drain mechanic people don't like. The NPC escort mechanic people don't like. It's a little long, not as long these days when you breeze through it on a lower difficulty like Epic Elite when you're at cap, but it's not a raid that players like that much. So I can't see it being Caught in the Web. I just cannot imagine they would do that. Plus, they just added a bunch of new weapons with Isle of Dread. Why would they add a whole new set of Caught in the Web, like legendary Caught in the Web weapons? It's no way. Fall of Truth, kind of discussed this before. I mean, could they do Fall of Truth? Maybe, but I just don't see it. It already has an epic version. I feel like if they probably, if they wanted to make legendary versions of the Giant Hold raids, I feel like they would save that for a Giant Hold update if they ever wanted to make legendary Giant Hold. But I just can't see it being Fall of Truth. Fire and Thunder Peak already has a level 30 version. Same with all these: Fire Adjust, Deathworm, Mark of Death, Legendary Shroud. Is there anything else? I think we already got through all these. Yeah, Riding the Storm Out, Curse of Strahd. These are all in-game raids. All these are in-game raids. Let's see. Is there anything else we missed here? There is not. So yeah, that's really it, guys. There's really not very many options for them for raids to take legendary. It's really just down to basically Tower of Despair, which makes by far the most sense. Titan, which I think is the next most likely one, I guess, just because it is a raid no one runs, so it would kind of be new, and it also only has a rogue version and no one runs it. It's just I could see them doing that. I mean, they could. I don't think I can't imagine why you would do Titan when Tower of Despair is just sitting there, and it makes so much more sense from what players want, from a loot perspective, it's just like from a work perspective. I can't imagine. I'm not a developer, but I can't imagine that Titan would be less work than Tower of Despair to make legendary. So the only other things I could see it being is like Demon Queen. If they wanted a super fast low man hour job, then yeah, maybe they'd pick Demon Queen for that reason. Chronoscope, maybe players really like that raid, they could turn it into a legendary version, but that's really, I mean, Vaughn 5 and 6 maybe. So I guess at the end of the day, my prediction, guys, I think Tower of Despair by far the best chance, and then huge gap, and then I guess Titan would be next, and then Chrono, Demon Queen, but it's got to be Titan. Why would they? Or it's got to be. I'm sorry, not Titan. It's got to be Tower of Despair. Why would they not pick Tower of Despair? It just makes, I can't think of any pragmatic reason why they wouldn't pick it, unless it's just something about it that I don't understand that would cause it to be tons of extra work, or there's devs in SSG who just love Titan or whatever and decide they just want to do that because that's what they want to do, despite it not making the more sense than Tower of Despair from a player perspective. But yeah, guys, that's my thoughts. So that's the end of this video, and I'll have at least one more videos talking about the Sev Q&A. There's a lot of topics I haven't gotten to, but guys, yeah, that's gonna be it for this one. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about what raid will happen. Again, guys, this video is what I think will happen, not necessarily what I want to happen. It's more like what I think makes most sense. So let me know what you think. That's gonna be it for this video. Hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one. Take care.